Greetings and welcome to the Corner, that is TC's Gaming Corner. This is the third video of my tutorial series on the GMT air combat game Red Storm. My focus is teaching new or prospective players the basics of the game. Red Storm has an intimidating 60-page rulebook, and I hope to help players get through that rulebook with this series of tutorial videos. In the first video, I taught the basics of air unit movement and activations. In the second video, I taught you about aircraft detection and the complicated part of the game, air combat. In this video, I'm going to teach you about surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, and jamming. The last two videos I plan to do will teach you about bombing and about raid planning. Note that the game Red Storm also features solitaire rules that are only applicable in dedicated and designed solitaire modules. I'm not going to go into those solitaire specific rules. Also, Red Storm is based on the system used in Downtown, covering the air war over North Vietnam, and Elusive Victory, covering Israeli-Egyptian air operations in the early 1970s. While each game has its own nuances, the basics that I cover in these videos apply to all three games. Just be sure to read the fine print when you're playing the earlier games. First, we're going to talk about AAA, that is, anti-aircraft artillery. AAA is basically medium and large caliber guns on the ground that fire at aircraft. Basic AAA comes in three basic varieties: light, medium, and heavy. There are also some radar-guided assisted AAA systems that I will discuss later. Now remember in the last video when I walked you through the complicated steps of air-to-air combat. In a single air-to-air combat, each side could roll a die or dice 5, 6, 7, or even more times in one combat. Well, good news. AAA combat is a lot simpler. You simply roll on this table to see if you hit, and if you do hit, roll on this table to see what, if any, damage you do. If you do damage or shoot down an aircraft, finally you roll to determine which aircraft you hit, you roll for bailout, etc., just like air-to-air combat. The key thing in AAA combat is to know when you get to fire. Basically, you can fire every time a flight expends a movement point or moves within 1 hex of your AAA. Any flight, including your own, can be attacked by AAA if it's active. Those ground pounders don't care. They see any aircraft as a target. Now, active AAA projects a flak barrage into its hex and all immediate surrounding hexes. You roll for a AAA hit every time a flight enters a hex in the barrage zone via movement, scatter, or SAM avoidance, or expends a movement point, such as a hard turn, in that barrage zone, or successfully engages a flight inside the barrage zone. Remember, AAA will attack friendly or enemy flights, whether they are detected or undetected. Note that before you use AAA, you have to activate it. You can do that during the radar phase or admin phase, or when a flight enters a hex adjacent to the AAA. That way, friendly fights can overfly inactive units without fear of being attacked. Also note that AAA can be on map, such as this L here stands for light flak, or it can be purchased. Primarily, the Warsaw Pact has the opportunity to purchase and upgrade light to medium or heavy flak, and it can be placed on the map outside of normal organic flak locations. On the Warsaw Pact side, you'll see here medium AAA at Heine and Erfurt and Waltersleben, and light at Hausleben and Mühlhausen. But on the NATO side, you only see light AAA. The AAA can be on the map or purchased and can be upgraded. I'll cover more about this during the tutorial on pre-raid planning and setup. A few other notes about AAA. There's FireCan, radar guided AAA that can be used by the Warsaw Pact. And there's mobile AAA, the 2K22s, the Gepards, and the Vulcans that can be used by either side. FireCan radars must be placed in hexes that already contain AAA. They can be radar off, they can be hidden. Now FireCan radars have a range of 2 hexes, and they can be activated similarly to AAA. That is during the radar phase or admin phase, or when a flight moves within its range. You can activate him and he gets to fire. Now radar FireCan and radar AAA only get 1 shot per turn, whereas organic AAA fires every single time one of the triggering events happens within it. The 2K22 for the Warsaw Pact and the Gepard and Vulcans for NATO also remain hidden until they are turned on. However, unlike the FireCans, they only have a range just like regular AAA of 1 hex. And again, they can only fire once per turn. And finally, there are a variety of rules about organic AAA that some ground units have and small arms barrages. These generally apply to aircraft on the deck on the enemy side of the front lines. I'm not going to go into the details here, but do want to highlight this for you and recommend that you read the rules on that. Now, resolution of the AAA attacks is pretty simple. You simply look at the type of barrage or AAA, small arms fire, small arms fire, light, medium, or heavy, or here the FireCan, Gepard, 2K22, and Vulcan. Look at the altitude band that the flight is in. Here we have an F-15 at medium altitude moving within range of medium flak. We would look at the medium altitude band on the table and cross-reference it with the medium AAA. And that number you see is the 2-hit number on 2D10. So medium altitude against medium flak takes a 17 on 2D10 to hit. If you do get a hit, you go to the AAA damage table. You apply any of these modifiers down here. Some apply to barrage AAA, which is regular flak, and then some apply to radar mobile AAA. You apply any of these modifiers. You roll on this table, and you see what the effects are, which can range from no effect, the NE. Then you see D is damaged aircraft, C is crippled, K is killed. If you see multiple, you could have 2 aircraft damaged. Just like air-to-air combat, if you do get any of these results, you roll on the damage allocation table to see which aircraft were affected. That's really all there is to AAA combat. Now that we've covered AAA, let's talk about surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs. SAMs can be in the following statuses. They can be located, or they can be unlocated, and they can be on, or they can be off. And a hidden SAM is actually not on the map, and it's recorded on your SAM log by pen and paper if you're playing the board game, or you can use invisible counters if you're using the vassal that your opponent cannot see until you reveal it. You can also have dummy SAMs and dummy radars. Dummy SAMs are located, but you can never turn them on. Dummy radars are SAM warnings. They can even lock onto enemy aircraft, but they can never fire SAMs. Generally, SAMs have to get a target lock or acquisition before they can fire. There are a couple of important exceptions. The first is infrared SAMs like these two, the SA-13 and the Chaparral. The second are some more complex rules that the game covers for electro-optically guided SAMs, lock-on after launch, and anti-radar SAMs. I'm going to briefly cover infrared SAMs, but not the more complex rules for the other situations in this tutorial. SAMs attempt radar lock during the SAM acquisition phase. To attempt a radar acquisition, select an enemy flight within range. This is the range for the Roland, so he has to be within range. Roll 2 dice, apply these modifiers, and then see if you are successful and how successful, either with a partial. So I'm going to pull the alpha because it matches the ID. So either a partial or a full acquisition. Then during the movement phase, we're going to say he's down here. Then during the movement phase, you can attack flights that you have acquired if they are within range. So you would attack now. Note that there can be rules of engagement prohibitions. You cannot fire if a friendly flight, including dummies, is within 4 hexes. So these tornadoes would have to be more than 4 hexes before the Roland can fire on this Su-24. To attack, roll 2 dice and apply these modifiers. The altitude and range modifier is different for every SAM. So to determine that for your SAM, you look at the SAM table or SAM data card and determine the range and altitude of the target for the modifier. If you get a 12 or higher, you have a possible hit. The target flight then rolls for SAM defense on this table, applying these modifiers below for one of these possible results: SAM damage, SAM avoid, or miss. Now miss is self-explanatory. A SAM avoid requires you to place this marker on the flight, which requires 1 movement point to clear, and in doing so you roll on this SAM avoidance table, roll a die, and avoid into another hex per the table, and dive 1 band. Flights with ordnance also roll to see if they jettison their ordnance. Each aircraft in the flight jettisons on a roll of 1 through 6 on a 1d10. Finally, flights that perform SAM avoidance cannot initiate air-to-air combat or make an air-to-ground attack that movement phase. SAM damage is also self-explanatory. Roll on this table, based on it being a full or partial acquisition, and apply the results for damaged, crippled, or killed. As always, roll for damage allocation and bailout if applicable. Finally, note that SAM batteries have a limited amount of ammunition. You should record each firing as an expenditure. You can also choose to fire a salvo, which gets you a +2 on the SAM attack table, but expends 2 ammo points instead of 1. Now, infrared SAMs are simpler. They don't get lock-ons. They simply need a line of sight. The line of sight generally can only be broken by low decks of clouds. The catch is that infrared SAM range usually a range of 2 with a maximum altitude of medium. So this tornado would be too high for the infrared SAM. But the procedure is the same if you do get a shot off, even though there are a couple modifiers that apply only to infrared SAM shots. Speaking of infrared SAMs, the last thing I'm going to discuss in this video is radar jamming. And guess what? Radar jamming doesn't apply to infrared SAMs, but it does apply to the rest of your SAMs. Radar jamming is the use of dedicated jamming aircraft to jam enemy radars. No, not with a jar of jelly like in Spaceballs, but with concentrated radar signals that affect the enemy's early warning radars and their SAM radars. Most aircraft also have an intrinsic jamming value that affects SAM acquisition rolls, but that is accounted for in the SAM acquisition and damage tables. There are dedicated radar jamming aircraft such as the EF-111 and Su-24 F model. If you look at their aircraft data cards or tables, you'll see their jamming values, higher being better, and the range for these values. These aircraft can conduct standoff jamming and spot jamming. So how do they work? Well, let's look at the map. The jamming phase takes place before movement and detection. Standoff jamming affects all early warning radar detection attempts radar-equipped AAA attacks, SAM acquisition attempts, and SAM attacks made by units in the jammer's arc. So it would be this arc here and to here. So this standoff jamming aircraft would affect the Roland 2 and the Patriot, but not this unidentified SAM over there. And you use the range to the target by looking at the aircraft data table. Range 8 would still be, for the Sukhoi 24, would still be a jamming strength of 3. If it was range 9, you would then use the 2 jamming strength. Generally, you just apply the modifier of the standoff jamming strength based on the range from the affected unit to the jammer to whatever roll you're making. But here's the tricky part. The jamming aircraft gets its full jamming strength if it is also in the 60-degree arc of the affected radar and the target. Otherwise, the jamming aircraft only applies half of its jamming strength, rounded up as a modifier. So let's look at this Roland 2. If he was attempting to lock on or acquire this Sukhoi 17, his 60-degree radar arc for this attempt would be there to there. So the standoff jamming is not within that arc, and he would only use half of its value. But if he was attempting to acquire this Sukhoi 17, his 60-degree radar arc would be from there to there, which does contain the standoff jamming, so the standoff jammer would use its full strength as a modifier for any acquisition or an attack roll. You can also have off-map standoff jamming. With off-map jamming specified in the scenario rules, the jamming aircraft are considered off-map, and you can just adjust the location and direction of the standoff jamming. Some flights also have a spot jamming capability. Check their aircraft data card or the table. For instance, the Sukhoi 24 here has spot jamming for 2 radars available. A jammer conducting spot jamming doubles its jamming strength against spot jammed radars. You can declare new or different spot jamming during the jamming phase. So, if this standoff jamming aircraft during the jamming phase kept that facing, he could spot jam the Patriot down here and the Roland 2. The Patriot, being at range 9, normally would have a standoff jamming value of 2, but because it's being spot jammed, it's doubled to 4. Now there's another rule that Patriots have a maximum standoff jamming effect of 3. But if it were not a Patriot, if it were another SAM type, it would be doubled to 4. The Roland here is also being spot jammed. At a range of 6, normally it would be a standoff jamming value of 3, but again it's doubled to 6. The maximum jamming effects modifier is 6 for any attempt, except against Patriots and SA-12s. As I just mentioned, it's 3. So for the Roland 2, we have a jamming strength of 6 from the spot jamming, and on the Patriot we have a jamming strength of 3. Finally, an aircraft loses its standoff jamming for the remainder of the turn if it voluntarily turns, dives, conducts SAM avoidance or anti-radar tactics, becomes disordered, aborts, has a maneuver marker, SAM avoidance or BVR avoid marker placed on it, or takes a damaged, crippled, or shot down result. So, if this jammer were moving, and while it moves, the jamming moves with it. So there is tactics involved in wanting to change where your arc is during the turn. But if he were to, for whatever reason, have to turn, he would then lose the jamming for the remainder of the turn, including the spot jamming. Now again, during the next jamming phase, he can put it here. He can declare a new arc. So he could declare this arc if he was worried about this SAM warning. And he could again place 2 spot jamming. That concludes my third tutorial on Red Storm. We covered AAA, surface-to-air missiles, and radar jamming. Join me on the next video where we'll learn about ground attack. Thank you for tuning in to TC's Gaming Corner.